Hello and welcome back to The Broken. Today we're going to talk about turning the other cheek. Most of us hear that and immediately feel, some level of tension. For a long time, this line of scripture was used to explain that we should not be violent. It's like the lesson tends to be lost in translation or probably lost in cultural differences. It sounds beautiful in theory. Don't be violent. Try to resolve conflict without injury or pain to you or another person. Even if you do get attacked by somebody, we should offer them the other cheek. But if you've ever actually been hit, it doesn't sound beautiful at all. When Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. We either romanticize it or quietly dismiss it. Some interpret it as complete non-violence under all circumstances. Others reject it entirely because it seems naive. But I don't think either extreme is actually accurate. And I don't say that from theory. I say it from memory. I grew up around conflict. Not constantly, not in some dramatic war zone, but enough that fights weren't an abstract concept. Enough that humiliation and violence were not the same thing. There were bullies. There were moments where I fought back and won. There were moments where I fought back and lost. There were moments where I didn't respond at all. There's two of those memories actually that stand out as I'm recording these words now. Not because they were worse, but because they shaped how I understood that verse. At least partially. In middle school, we had a lock-in at the school. All-night games, music, that exhausted kind of excitement that only kids can sustain, Morning comes, so now the lock-in is over. It's time to go home. My sister and I are walking home, and suddenly I feel a punch from behind. Somebody caught me to my right side temple. Then another one, back of the head. More than one boy. Fists were landing on my back and on my head. Both sides of my head. My sister turns around and shoves one of the guys down. She's not going to just take it. And I remember something strange happening. In my mind, I wasn't fearful or full of rage or even thinking we need to defend ourselves. Actually, it was turn the other cheek. I understand I was a kid, so this wasn't some profound theological reflection. It was simple. It was almost childish. If I don't fight back, maybe it stops. And maybe, in a way, I protect her. So I told her not to respond. And we kept walking. And I stepped slightly behind her. So if they were to go for her, I could fight, I could defend, I could block. Then I could turn around and start really taking the fight and tell her to run home. It's like all of this process happened in a moment. It was already decided almost. But I absorbed the hits. Let's say 7 or 8 more. Enough to sting, enough to feel humiliating. But then they stopped. The other boys just ran off. I remember hearing one kid yelling something along the lines of, he took your all's hits like a, you know, they used a potty word there, so I'm not going to say it here. I probably could. I don't even know if I care about whether or not cussing is good or bad. But anyway, that's not what we're focusing on right now. We're focusing on turning the other cheek. But the point was clear. I didn't respond. I basically shielded her, and the attack ended. Now, here's what I didn't understand then. That wasn't pure spirituality. That was a strategy mixed with instinct. Escalation likely would have brought more on the attack. If I turned to fight, maybe it could have gotten her hurt. So restraint in that moment reduced risk. But it wasn't passive submission. It was measured. Okay. Another night, something a little more severe, in my opinion, took place. I was still a middle schooler, walking to a friend's house, and it was late at night. There were 3 adults that walked up to me from basically the other side of the road. They crossed the street, came over to me in front of this gas station that I was, used to walking by. I went to this friend's house pretty often. It was 2 men and 1 woman. And one of them men, in fact, was like very muscular. He hit the gym a lot, it seemed. They asked for a light. I said I didn't have one. I was a child. I didn't actually smoke at the time. I don't smoke now, but there's been some years that I did. Anyway, but it was just an excuse for them to get by me. Come over, hey, do you have a light? But they grabbed me. I remember trying to pull free. Then a punch that felt like my lights were shutting off, My head slammed into something hard. I'm pretty sure it was a tree, but it may have been a light post, or a telephone pole. I remember the glow of the gas station lights, hands going through my pockets while I was barely conscious, and then nothing. Then I eventually woke back up, standing up alone. The attackers were gone. That wasn't humiliation. There was no response to being humiliated that would have taken place there. There was no dominance theater. I was being robbed. That was level 3 violence, I'm going to get into that a little bit. No one would argue that I was spiritually obligated to offer the other side of my face. That's not what the verse is addressing. Here's where I think we go wrong. We collapse all aggression into one moral category. But they're not the same. There's humiliation, right? That's level 1. There's dominance posturing. That would be level 2. And then there's actual violent threat. That's the level 3 that I was talking about a minute ago. I'm literally a child being attacked by full-grown men. Maybe the woman. I'm not sure if she actually attacked or not. That's violent threat. Bible or no, that's a violent threat issue. So when Jesus speaks about the right cheek, he's describing a backhanded slap, typically between one man to another man, which was a social insult meant to degrade a person in that day and age and in that culture. It was a honor shame culture, which is not really what we deal with today in America. Where was I? Oh, so the backhanded slap, you know, a right-handed backhand slap to the right cheek was the specific scenario we were talking about. It wasn't an attempt to kill you. It was a way of saying, you're beneath me. Know your place. Turning the other cheek in that context wasn't surrender. It was actually a defiance without escalating the issue. It was you saying, you can try to humiliate me, but you don't control my dignity. That's different from allowing yourself to be beaten unconscious. So here's what I believe now. You should never put your hands on someone first. Not out of pride. Not out of ego. Not because you feel disrespected. You know, we should never put our hands on someone because we need to dominate them. That's level 1, and level 1 doesn't require fist. But if there's a true threat, if someone's trying to injure you, if someone is trying to harm your family, you know, actively attacking, defend yourself. It's not a sin. It does not violate turn the other cheek, because defense is not retaliation. Defense neutralizes a threat. Retaliation escalates. You know, defense ends danger. Retaliation tries to win pride. Those are two different spirits. You know, retaliation defense is not a soft man's reaction. It's a disciplined soldier's response. And I'm not saying I was one. I wasn't. I'm not now. You know, I was a child then, and I've never been a soldier. But the analogy helps. A successful battle is not won through emotional reaction. Solid soldiers are trained to respond, not react. They assess and neutralize the threat. And when the threat is over, they stop. They don't feel an innate urge to dominate completely. Domination is an ego problem. Neutralizing is the mission. And that distinction is everything. So turn the other cheek isn't about becoming fragile. In fact, you would step back into those days and into the culture of the Judea at the time. And if you received a right-handed slap from somebody, it would have been a slap to your right cheek, a backhanded slap. Again, as I said, to humiliate you. If you turn the other cheek, this is another thing I've thought about with this one, and you present them to the left, wouldn't they just still be able to humiliate you more by smacking you with the backhand of their left hand, backside of their left hand? Here's the thing with that, though. That was the unclean hand in that culture, which would be even more degrading for the person being slapped, right? Like, that's what makes sense to me. However, here's the thing about it. A comparison, if you will. If you slapped somebody, let's think of it in court today. Let's say there's a judge who's issuing a fine and just calmly says, you know, you're going to be fined $1,000, blah, 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 whatever. That's like their legal, and they're just sitting there calmly saying what the deal is. And the defendant is there, and they're taking that fine. In comparison, that was the right-handed slap on the right cheek of that defendant. if that defendant turned their cheek, or AKA says, no, I'm not dealing with that. I'm not handling that fine. If the comparison here is, okay, well, now I decide to slap you with my unclean hand, my left hand, even if it's a backsided slap. It's kind of like the judge losing his mind, jumping over the stand, or whatever you call it that the judge sits at, throwing papers at the person and yelling and screaming at them. If they were to do that, if that other person were to do that to the person they were trying to humiliate, they would then bring a lot of dishonor upon themselves, because they would show that they had a lack of control, a lack of self-control to all of the other people around at the time. So instead of just attempting to humiliate someone and maybe show them as you're lesser than I am, now they're being basically animals. So you don't receive that left-handed slap if you turn the other cheek. You're just turning that cheek and you're saying, all right, you're going to slap the right side, but now you can't slap that right side because my left is what's exposed. And if you attack me now with the same attempt for humiliation, you are only going to dishonor yourself more than you will humiliate me. So it's an equalizer. So turning the other cheek is about becoming ungovernable by humiliation. It's about refusing to let an insult control you. It was never a command to surrender your life to violence. So again, back to the levels I was talking about. Level 1 is the insult. It's nothing. It's in comparison to the childhood I came up with. Level 3 is that dangerous threat scenario. Level 1 is, some other kid going, ha ha, you have a funny haircut. Like, in my mind, especially today as an adult, but even in my mind as a kid, that's just like, all right, well, you just said something stupid, but whatever, I don't care. Like, that's the comparison of the left-handed smack. The right-handed smack and the turning to the other cheek. So the response needs to be equivalent to the actual danger involved. Different responses for different realities. That's not comparison, that's wisdom. Sometimes I still think about that night, now that I've mentioned it on here. The gas station lights humming. The fake yellow glow that kind of makes everything feel exposed, because it is light. People can see it, but it's also a light that makes you feel invisible at the same time. Just a middle school boy standing up from the ground, a ringing in my head, pockets turned out, looking around to see if anyone knew, if anyone saw, if anyone cared. Cars probably passed by. People were likely inside the store and saw what was going on. And no one stepped out. And no one intervened. Just artificial light and silence. And a boy trying to steady himself. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel spiritual. definitely didn't feel like I had embodied some sort of profound teaching like I'm kind of trying to do with this episode. I just felt alone. So I walked. One step at a time, because what else is there to do? You walk, you absorb, and then you survive. Years later, when I hear turn the other cheek, I don't picture stained glass windows. I picture that sidewalk. I picture the weight of not knowing whether you should fight or endure or run or trust. And I realized something now that I couldn't see back then. Turning the other cheek was never about pretending pain doesn't hurt. It was never about denying your fear or glorifying victimhood. It was about refusing to let humiliation define who you are. It was about choosing who you become after the hit. That night under those lights, I didn't become violent, mainly because I was just a very weak victim in the moment, a child compared to multiple adults. I didn't become hardened beyond repair, though, but I also didn't become passive. The future, for me, became something steadier formed. I'm not going to say that I became anything perfect or polished, just I felt like I could hold a deeper meaning to this turn the other cheek philosophy that was not about complete nonviolence. And maybe that's the invitation. Not to be soft, not to be a savage, but to be governed, to know when to endure, to know when to defend, and to walk forward either way. Still standing, still breathing, still choosing who you are under whatever lights life leaves you in. Thank you for listening to The Broken. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe, follow, leave a review. If your platform is something that you can leave a review on, I don't know. I'm still also kind of dealing with trying to get this up on multiple platforms. And don't know much about all the technology behind all this, so grow with me. It helps the show reach more people who are trying to wrestle with life, faith, and broken places inside all of us. And as always, don't just survive the brokenness. Understand it, walk through it, and keep moving forward. I'll talk to you next time.